Hey everybody, Dr. Perkins here, a board certified OBGYN, and today we're talking about, can you feel an IUD with your finger? In this video, we will talk about the parts of an IUD, we'll review the different types of IUDs, and we'll talk about what if you can feel the IUD in place inside of your uterus. IUDs are wonderful options for contraception purposes, and they are placed inside of your uterus. There are two main parts of an IUD. The T-shaped portion, which is usually a firmer part of an IUD, as well as the very bottom part of the IUD that has a string. The purpose of that string is for removal only. It also helps in being able to feel that IUD string as you do your own string checks at home, which I do recommend because IUDs may rise inside of the uterus, and so that the string may not be felt in the vaginal space anymore. They can be expelled and come out of the uterus altogether, therefore not providing any protection against pregnancy. IUD strings may also be lowered inside of the vaginal space. This can happen if your uterus is in the process of expelling the IUD, as it sometimes may do. And so with that, the IUD is no longer in place. It is lower inside of the cervix, and sometimes you can feel it inside of the vaginal area. There are 5 different types of IUDs. The Skyla IUD is the smallest IUD, the IUD that releases the least amount of hormones, and it can be used for the shortest period of time. The Skyla is approved for use up to 3 years at a time. Often, those who have never been pregnant or are teenagers and on the younger side may opt to choose the Skyla for contraceptive purposes. The Kyleena IUD is also the same size as the Skyla. The difference between these two is that the Kyleena can be used for 5 years at a time. And so if you want a smaller device but would like coverage against pregnancy for a longer period of time, the Kyleena may be a good option for you. The next two IUDs, the Liletta and the Mirena, are very similar in size. They also release a similar amount of hormones on a daily basis. Because of their size and their ability to hold more hormones within them, these can be used up to 7 years. These 4 IUDs are hormonal IUDs. With this, your cycles may become lighter and lighter as you use the IUDs over time. Sometimes your cycles may completely stop, and this is okay. Patients have often asked me, well, am I bleeding elsewhere inside? And that's not the case. The hormone that is involved with these IUDs are progesterone-based hormones. If we were to review the menstrual cycle and what happens internally inside of your uterus, this may create some understanding of why bleeding may not occur. In the first part of your menstrual cycle, the hormone estrogen is dominant. With this, the thickness inside of your uterus increases until ovulation has occurred. After ovulation, progesterone is a hormone that is primarily released inside of your body. Progesterone is responsible for thinning the inside layer of the uterus. So when we think about using an IUD such as the Kyleena, Liletta, Mirena, or Skyla, these devices are progesterone-only hormonal contraceptions. And so progesterone thins that inside part of the uterus. If you're not creating tissue on a monthly basis because your estrogens are no longer active as the IUD is in place, you're not creating tissue that needs to be bled off from month to month. And so cycles may not occur anymore. Some people may still get their cycles as they are using these hormonal IUDs. Many others will have a lighter cycle, if any at all. So if you have a history of having heavy vaginal bleeding with your cycles, it is a good option to try an IUD such as the 4 that were mentioned so far. The last IUD is the Paragard copper IUD. This IUD can be used up to 12 years at a time. The copper is the active part of the IUD that blocks pregnancy from happening. Out of all the IUDs that are mentioned here, the copper is the largest. I will say that even though it is the largest of the 5, these are still relatively very small devices, and visually it is very hard to detect the difference in size between all 5 of them. Literally, we're talking about millimeters size difference between each. The main difference between the strings of these IUDs is either the color, which can range between blue, brown, and white, as well as the texture of the strings. All IUD strings are otherwise very similar in texture and may take several weeks or even a few months before they soften so that they're not firm to the touch and not felt during sexual activity. So what if you can actually feel your IUD in place? Most common complaints from patients would be that during the month, they may feel cramping that may be associated with the IUD being in place. And yes, cramping could happen because the uterus cramps whenever it tries to remove something. So think about giving birth. We're trying to expel a baby. Your uterus will contract and cramp. For a menstrual cycle, just the same. The tissue that is built up from month to month, your uterus will cramp to try to remove that. Sometimes your uterus thinks that it needs to remove this IUD. And so because of that, it will cramp in order to try to expel it. And so if you're having some cramping, one option is to take some ibuprofen to help to decrease the contractions that are happening with the uterus. Sometimes this cramping may come with a bleed as well. And this is normal, especially during the first 4 to 6 months of use when you can still have normal bleeding or even irregular bleeding. It is very unlikely that your IUD is malpositioned or not in the right place. But to be 100% sure of this, it is important to get an ultrasound off your uterus and the IUD to make sure that the IUD was actually placed correctly initially. A malpositioned IUD is an IUD that is not sitting in the endometrial cavity or the space inside of the uterus. Sometimes upon placement, the IUD may be in the muscle of the uterus or sometimes even in the abdominal space. The likelihood of this happening is way less than 1%. Most providers who place IUDs are well skilled at placing them in the correct place. You always have a backup as well with getting that transvaginal or transabdominal ultrasound. This will always be reassuring that your IUD is in place. Once it is in place, the likelihood of moving outside of the uterus is almost impossible. IUDs will also not move during sexual activity, so there's no concern for the type of sexual activity, positioning, or how often sexual activity occurs. At any time, if you are concerned about your IUD, please communicate that with your provider. Go in to actually be seen and also have a speculum exam so they can see the strings and a bimanual exam where they can feel your uterus to make sure that everything feels normal. And again, it doesn't hurt to get a pelvic ultrasound to know exactly where that IUD is. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation and maybe you've learned something new today. I have a free gift for you. At the link below, you can get a free copy of my ebook, Hormones Don't Lie. Thank you so much for being here. If you've enjoyed our conversation, go ahead and leave a comment. I'd love to see. But also like and share with someone who may need or know more about IUDs. I'm Dr. Perkins, a board-certified OBGYN. Please join me next time. Take care.